Here we go with part 4 of the Grizzly G1182 rebuild restore, and we're going to be doing the setup, the calibration, and put the knives in and get this thing running and tested. Coming up. I'm Roger and welcome to the shop, and if you've been following along on the rebuild of this 1989/90 Grizzly G1182 Jointer that I picked up in somewhat rough and rusted condition. If you hadn't seen the previous videos, I completely tore this thing down, sandblasted it, painted it, went through everything, cleaned everything up, removed all the rust, and I've got it mostly put back together as you saw in part 3. What we're going to do here is the calibration and the setup, put the knives in, and joint some wood. See how well this thing works. Okay, so time to put the power cord on the jointer. And if you go to your local home store or whatever and you're looking at heavy rubber cord, heavy duty, and you go to buy it by the foot, it's very expensive. The best thing to do is to find a heavy duty cord, extension cord, like here. This is SJ0082 extreme duty cord, all rubber. It's 25 foot, 12.3, which is exactly what I need. This cord was $20. If I wanted to buy 12 foot of 12.3 SJ0082 cord, it would have cost me about $35. And then I'd have to buy the ends. So what I'm going to do is cut this in half. I'll use one half on the jointer, and I'll either use the other half to make a 12 foot cord, or I'll use it on another project. But it is, if you're looking to put a cord on a tool like that, it is generally cheaper to buy an extension cord and just cut the end off. So I'll get this prepped up and get this cord in, get the motor wired, and do a little bit of a test run. Okay, here's a diagram of the electrical on here. I said I would include this. Of course, if this doesn't make any sense to you, then you need to have an electrician do it. Don't be fooling around trying to do something like this if you don't know what you're doing. You could easily get hurt, or you could hurt somebody else. This is just a rough sketch. You know, it's not an AutoCAD. I didn't get fancy with it. I just sketched it out on a piece of graph paper quick. Like I mentioned in the previous video, I don't actually draw this out when I do something this simple. But for those that are curious, this is how the circuit works. Okay, the first adjustment here I'm going to talk about is what they call the gib adjustment. There's these two screws here. This one here is what locks your table from sliding. This particular model of jointer is what they call a sliding dovetail. The newer ones have what they call a parallelogram adjustment. So a little bit different. What these screws here do is they adjust how easily you can move this fence up and down and how much slop there is in it. So when you loosen your table here, this judges how easily and smoothly this will move up and down without rocking back and forth. And I have mine set so that it moves fairly easily, but there's not a whole lot of slop there or anything. And once you get those set, you just tighten these little jam nuts up with a 10mm wrench. And that'll hold it in place there. And if you find out that at some time in the future it gets a little bit too sloppy, you can tighten those up again. In fact, I may tighten that top one up a little more. And I'm liking that. I don't want a whole lot of slop there because I don't want to release this lever and have it just fall down. And you'll do exactly the same thing for the outfeed table. Also, after you adjust your tables, don't forget to tighten that lever down. Keep them from moving. Okay, the next thing you want to check, and I do this before I put the knives in, I've lowered both of these tables down quite a bit. I've rotated the cutter head so that it is where the knives are not. And I have the apex of the curve top. So what you want to do is put a straight edge across there. I'm just going to use a level here on this one. And you want to raise each table up until the tables are parallel with this and the straight edge is just barely touching the crown of that arc. So as you can see there, it's just barely touching there. Now what you want to find out is if it does the same thing all the way across. You should just barely rock that a little bit. So I'm in good shape. If you would happen to be off a little bit, there's not a whole lot of adjustment on these tables as far as moving them this way. You would need to shim one side or the other underneath here. I have my finger on this bearing holder. You can put a 5/10 thousandths whatever shim underneath there. I took note of the shim that was under this. There was a shim on the back side. I didn't actually measure it for thickness, but when I reassembled this, I put that same shim back in. This is extremely critical if you were to put a Helix head in here, because you can take a little bit of the fudge out with the knives here, but it's better to actually have this perfect. So with that set, next thing we need to set is the outfeed table. And to do that, I'm going to need to have the knives in it. So we're going to put the knives in next. Okay, I'm going to explain here how to install one of these knives. I have this one in and set. And a couple of things you're going to need. Obviously you'll need a gib here. This is what they call a gib. I'm going to run these bolts in. I had to do some serious cleaning up on these because these were rusted really bad. This is the knife setting gauge. It's available from Grizzly. I don't remember what I paid for it. It wasn't expensive. I think it was $14. You'll need a 12mm wrench. And here's where it gets a little tricky, because if you don't have what they call a thin wrench or a tappet wrench, what I did was I just took one of these cheap ones here and ground it down till I made it thin enough that it would fit down in here, because a conventional 12mm wrench, I tried 3 or 4 of them and none of them would fit. So found one of these off-brand cheapies and just ground the end down on it. And you will need the little springs that go down inside, and I'll show that here in a second. And most important, other than the blade, you will need a cut-resistant glove or a block of wood to be messing with these blades, because they will cut you real quick. So I'll rotate this around and I get an empty slot up here. You'll also want to have your in-feed and out-feed tables in the full down position. Try to get this as much centered up as you can. You want to slide the gib in with the bolts facing the in-feed table, the bolt heads facing the in-feed table. And then way down inside are a couple little holes where these little springs go. So you drop one. Oh, sure, went down inside the jointer. Yeah, I'm going to have to retrieve that here in a minute. Let's try it this way so I don't do that again. I didn't have that problem when I did the first one. I set these little springs down in their holes. What these springs do is they push the blade up as you are adjusting it Of course, then you'll need your blade. You want to run your bolts out till they're not real snug, but a little bit snug against the cutting head. If you're just replacing knives, you won't have to go through quite this much because you wouldn't be taking the gibs and the springs out. Okay, what you'll want is you want to be able to see that spring up and down like that. You would take your gauge, you would set that over the top. There's a little boss right here that would set on the blade, and these two edges rest on the cutter head. And when everything's loose, you're going to have to fiddle a little bit with this. Of course, you want to get the blade centered in the head and the gib centered in the head. Then you can proceed to snug these down, starting with the center one. Just snug it, don't tighten it. And you do the two outside ones. Just snug there, and constantly double check. Make sure that nothing moved where it wasn't supposed to. That your knives are even all the way across. You can proceed to tighten them up. Tighten the center one a little bit. Then go to the outside ones. Keep checking, make sure nothing moved. Once you're certain that everything is where it's supposed to be, go ahead and snug them up the rest of the way. Obviously you don't want to over tighten them, but you do want to have them tight. I think the joiner knife flying out of there when it's running wouldn't be a good thing. And then of course you want to check it again. Make sure nothing moved. Make sure everything's where it's supposed to be. And we look good. Okay, now I get to go retrieve a spring. Okay, our next adjustment is the outfeed table. Now that you have all the knives in, what you want to do is take a straight edge. With your infeed table still down, raise your outfeed table up. To where the knife is just touching the outfeed or the straight edge when it's sitting parallel across the. This is getting to be fun here trying to balance this. And I need to bring that up a little more. And I have actually run out of adjustment here. I have to look into this. I don't know, maybe this rod down here is bent. But gonna look into that. Okay, what I found was the fence was actually keeping me from being able to set the table all the way up. So you want that there to just touch the blades on both sides, just like that. Once you get that set, you tighten this down. And then you'll need to tighten up the stop bolt, as you can see in this picture. And once you get the stop bolt tightened up, tighten up the jam nut. Okay, and then you want to do exactly the same thing on the infeed table. So that it just touches. And if it's not the same on both sides, then you may need to make a knife adjustment. And I seem to have a little bit of a difference there on that. I'm going to try another blade. Got it right in the apex. And at that point, you want to tighten up the stop nut underneath, and then run this through and check and make sure it comes back to the same place. And don't forget to tighten your jam nut. Now when I drop this and bring it back, it should come back to exactly the same place. And it did not, so something didn't hit under there like it was supposed to. Yeah, I got some sticky threads going on, I believe. I thought I was against the stop and I wasn't. Oh, try this again. Perfect. That would also be the time where you would want to calibrate your little pointer down here for the depth of cut. That little hole right there, I'm going to have to put some threads in that because the little screw that was in there before had rusted and it's just stripped out. So I got to make me a new screw for my little pointer. Or I should say a new screw hole, and thread it. Okay, next, and moving on to some fence adjustments. See here, these screws have slots in the ends with jam nuts. These dictate to how easily this will rotate and flop around and how much precision you have in it. So what I found is if you take them in just till they're snug against their seat, there's two on each side. And move the cord. That should allow this to rotate without it being too floppy. Yeah, I took a little bit too much there. Oh, forgot to release my pin. I like that. So then it's a matter of just tightening up these jam nuts. The fun things about this is some of the stuff's metric and some of it isn't. These are 9/16. Like your stop bolts, those are 5/16 bolts with a 1/2 inch head. But like the gib bolts are 12 millimeter. The gib screws on the front for adjusting the table, some of those are 1/8 inch Allen, and some of them are 3mm. I don't know why that is. Maybe somebody replaced some at one time. Okay, obviously we don't have everything set here yet because we got some things flopping around, but that was the first adjustment. Next adjustment would be to get your true 45. There's the stop bolt right here. Once you get your 45, I will never use this to bevel because I've got other things for that. But I guess we need to find out what's 45 here. So let me go get my angle gauge. Head on there, set that to 0. Okay, I can bring this down to 47.5, and like I said, I'll never bevel with this, but I am going to adjust this so that it does go to 45. And to do that, there's a nut right here. You back off, and then you rotate this rod to give you a little bit more travel. So I'll do that next after I get a wrench for that, because I probably don't have one over here that size. Okay, so this one happens to be 11/16. .9. Fiddle with that a little bit. I'll buy that right there. And now I need to take this back up to 90. .3, 89.9. That's showing me 90. Tighten this back up. Now that I rolled this, I threw everything off. Set this back down, zero it. 91.4, still need to make a little adjustment there. Shouldn't be a whole lot. Splitting hairs here now. 89.9 and 90.1. I'm going to leave it right there. And as another double check, put a machinist square on here. Yeah, and it's showing perfect. So I think we're good there. Fence is all set. Okay, so got the guard back on, got everything back together. Wipe the top and the fence down with acetone, and I've got a coat of paste wax on it right now. I'm going to let that dry, and then I'll buff it and then probably put another coat on. Something I noticed as I was setting this up, and I'll get around here in the end, the fence adjustment knob hits my upright, just barely grazes it when you go to move it to a 45. As I said, I'd rarely ever use this to bevel with. But in the case that I would, I could always put a smaller knob on there or re-drill that hole and move it over. A smaller knob would probably be the easiest thing. The other thing I noticed was, if you notice, the switch overhangs the table quite a bit. If I was going to be edge joining a board that was so wide that it would hit that, I think what I would do is move the fence over so that, well, it helps to even out the wear on the blades too if you have that over there in the center. That would miss the switch. My other option would be to take the switch from where it is and put it on the side of the upright, which I could also do. We'll see how it works out. Get a couple more coats of paste wax on here and get things buffed up, and we're going to give this a little test run. It's about 97 degrees in the shade, so it's a good time for it. Okay, time for a test. First run. Well, I chose to use pallet wood because that's always crooked and bowed and bent and warped, and that's what this stuff was, but seems to work fine. I do get some chips out down here. I'll have to try to kind of figure out if I can get those to direct down in a little better. And obviously with that on there, I need to get my dust collector hooked up, but otherwise appears to be working well. Well, I hope you got something out of this. It's been a fun project, and I now have a well-working and operating jointer. Got a few little changes I may make in the future with that switch, but otherwise happy with it. I need to get my dust collection port adapter to be able to use my dust collector, or just keep using this outside. But if you like this, appreciate getting a thumbs up. And of course, we're always looking for subscribers, and next to that subscribe button is a little bell. If you click that bell, you'll be notified when I post another video. Otherwise, I'm Roger. We'll see you on the next video.